Thank you, everyone who's joining us today. It's really nice to see your presence. With the webinar format, it's a little bit abstract, but we know you're here, so welcome. This is the Sara Turnbull funded design series, and it's my distinct honor and privilege to welcome our Provost, Peter Nwosu, who's our Provost at Lehman College, who will be doing our introduction of our guest speaker today. Provost.
Thank you, Alicia, and good afternoon, everyone. As Alicia mentioned, this designer speaker series actually began October of last year, October 6th. And the goal really is to have an opportunity to feature some of the design industry's most significant and diverse voices. And indeed, with a renewed focus on how design can impact social engineering and change. I had the pleasure of introducing the speaker at the second event of the series last October, and will be doing so again for today's speaker. So why do we have this program at Lehman? It is in fact a joint collaboration of the Lehman College's art department and our college art gallery. And so this has been a wonderful opportunity to have them collaborate in pulling this event together that has a significant impact on our program and our community. And the initiative really represents the college's commitment to the arts across an array of disciplines and offers a vital opportunity to expand on the impact of design for our students. And so I want to just welcome our wonderful students who have joined us this afternoon for this series. The series also underscores the point that's been made over and over throughout the last sessions we've had. Design is impactful across society, and it's even more impactful when it has an interdisciplinary focus that cuts across many fields. And that's what you would see again in today's discussion. I want to thank the Sara Turnbull Foundation for their support of the college. Miss Dorothy Dawn has been gracious to join us this afternoon. I want to give a big shout out to her and to the foundation for that support. As everyone knows, this is an initiative that they have generously funded for us. And it is a pilot program, really, that blends a robust academic work going on at our college with engaging public programming. I am indeed delighted to introduce our speaker for today's event, Ms. Meghan Preiss. And the theme of our series this afternoon is Designing Migration, Serving Human Mobility and Justice. And she's really a wonderful person to speak to the theme of this series this afternoon. Meghan works at the Ford Motor Company Ford unit as design lead researcher and strategist. If those of you who know the company very well, Ford is a strategic design and qualitative research lab within Ford Motor Company itself, and Ford Motor Company is located in Detroit, Michigan. The unit designs and implements qualitative research to bridge a strategic foresight and next vehicle product launches. So that's really an important part of the conversation this afternoon. Prior to coming to Ford Motor Company, Meghan spent a number of years working as the lead design researcher and strategist in Los Angeles, my former city, where she had the opportunity to work through a variety of challenges with companies like Lego, Boston Scientific, Hamilton Medical, BMW, Honda, and many, many more. Her passion to give back has led her to volunteer with her favorite design communities, and that community is the Industrial Designers Society of America and Shift Design. Those are organizations that she has volunteered for these many years. And currently she serves as the United States Young Designer Representative in the Young Designer Circle of the World Design Organization, where she has worked with young people on a number of design education initiatives. Meghan is a graduate of the Savannah College of Art and Design and holds a degree in industrial and service design. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Preiss virtually to Lehman College. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Awesome. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. Hi, Meghan. Just a quick put it all together. As Peter said, you know, the class that I am so lucky to teach along with Professor Galvez is a class that there's students to question the service of immigration. And in order for them to question it, they have to really understand it. They have to understand the history behind it, understand the anecdotes behind it, and definitely focus on it from a design-centric approach. And for that, they need to understand who are the people that make up this space. So I'm really happy because Meghan is not only this amazing designer, but she is also someone that I had the pleasure to graduate with and had take classes with at Savannah College of Art and Design in Georgia. So I know that we are in for a treat, guys. So without this much ado, Meghan, the floor is all yours.
Awesome. Let me share my screen. Dun, dun, dun. All right, are you guys seeing this? Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for having me. Laura, you stole my thunder just a little bit, but let's talk about why we're here. So to truly innovate, one must understand how an entire system works. This includes the who, the what, where everyone is giving and receiving value. And if you're not understanding the entire system, you're really just shooting in the dark. You aren't understanding the impact that it could have 2 or 3 levels away from where you're designing. And so today I want to talk you guys through a tool, or what I like to think of as a mindset, that will help you understand and evaluate migration and immigration and really any challenge or opportunity that you come across. Because as we all know, immigration, migration, they're really complicated and they can get really intricate and complex very quickly. And so today I'm going to talk through some examples that are not migration, but will teach you the same thoughts that you guys can have while you're exploring in your classes. So we're going to talk through this step by step, starting with understanding. And then we're going to go into, once we understand and we're understanding how, or we're asking ourselves why and exploring and defining, we'll dive into what stakeholders are by defining who they are, listing them, and then mapping them out to fully explore them. And then we'll dive into value. And value is really understanding how do stakeholders exchange it, and then again, mapping it so we start to build upon this really big picture and take a complex system and start from the very basics and add to it. And if we have a little bit of extra time today, I'd like to talk through a little bit of extra work that I have. And at the end of this, hopefully you'll understand how to really make an impact within a really complex system. So let's dive in. Starting with understanding, the first step to any project is to really understand what is the greater goal or the outcome one is seeking. So before you start any research or exploration or design, you should be asking yourself, what am I trying to learn? Or why am I doing this? The same way that you would ask yourself, why did you choose to go to this college? Or why did you choose to have this degree? Because you're seeking a certain outcome. And once you can have an idea of what your outcome is, you can start to really evaluate why you're doing something. And so for today, our why is, well, we want to learn how to evaluate a really complex system to best innovate and improve it. So to do this, we're going to go through a process of exploring and defining and diverging and converging. And this is the typical design process. You're going to gather a bunch of information or data, and then you're going to make sense of it and story tell it and do it again. And you just kind of keep going through this process of diverging and converging. And there is no right or wrong answer of how many times you want to do this. It's kind of up to you. So now that we know how we're going to do it, let's start diving into what a stakeholder is. The official definition of a stakeholder is that it's a person or a group or an organization that is connected to or has interest in a project or an organization. So essentially, all of us sitting here today are stakeholders. Technically, you as a student would be a stakeholder, and you could essentially map me as a speaker on your stakeholder map because we have a shared interest of this organization, of this school, and of this lecture series today. And so you start to see how maybe you never thought we were connected, but now we are, and we're starting to exchange value because of this. So when you're listing out your stakeholders, I find it easiest to list them within different levels. So the first level is your primary. They're going to be your customer or your user. Depending on what you're exploring, it could also be the employee or the client. Stepping out to the secondary level, you can start to think about, who does this person interact with, or this group of people interact with? This could be the media or local government or competitors. So stepping into an example that might be easier is like, as a student, you would be the primary stakeholder of a university. The next level, the secondary level of a stakeholder, would be your professors. And then if we step out to this third level, this tertiary level, we're starting to look at the people who influence not only the second level, but also the primary stakeholders. So this could be friends and family. Maybe this is the national government who are creating the laws and the policies that are impacting you. And going back to that student example, if you as a student are the primary, your professors are the secondary, then maybe your dean or the board of directors would be this tertiary level of understanding. They're still guiding you, and you might not interact with them every day, but they have impact on what you're doing. So after we've listed all these stakeholders, we can really start to map them through what is called a stakeholder map. And this is a really quick visual to understand a business or a service or an experience and start to really see how it all works together. So when I worked at a consultancy in Los Angeles, we used this tool a lot. We would mentor startups and work with large corporations. And personally, as a researcher, I would use this tool just to understand who all of the players or stakeholders are. So when we worked on a project with Lego, although we were I don't want to say just, but although we were designing packaging, internally we built this stakeholder map to understand who we needed to talk to and interview to really gain not only buy-in, but also understand how they would be impacted by this new product or service that we were designing. And so breaking this down one more level, let's walk through an example. So if I'm a consultancy and a startup has come to me, let's say this startup is a company that is creating a service where people with student debt can crowdsource to pay off this debt. So the primary stakeholder is the customer, this person with the student debt. And then the stakeholders, the secondary stakeholders, start to be the banks and the loan providers, maybe their employers or their friends and family. These are the people who they will most likely ask for help with their student loans. And maybe in this service, on the service side, they're going to be connecting with the media or tech support in this startup. When we go to the tertiary level or this third level, that's when we start seeing these peers. So while they might initially only crowdsource to their friends and family, you have to think if this thing goes viral, now their peers are getting involved and being impacted. If they are looking at their they might only be interacting with their loan provider or bank tellers, but on the tertiary level, the government is setting the laws and the taxes and how debt works, and they're really creating these policies that impact this. The same way that although to a customer you're only interacting with a tech support, there's all the people on the back end, like the engineers and the designers, that are pulling this whole thing off and really innovating in that space. And so once you start to see how these people are working together, you can add this extra layer of grouping them to understand where they all play. So starting with the green, these are all the people who are in the startup. These are all the business side of the people. The yellow are starting to formulate these financial institutions and the people who are controlling the money and asking for the money. Then you have this brown or pink group, and those are the people that really this customer is crowdsourcing from. And so by just this graph, now to explore how to innovate, we can start asking questions like, well, they're only crowdsourcing from 3 groups. Is there a way that we can expand how they're crowdsourcing and who they're crowdsourcing from? We can say, well, as a business, we could say, well, there's no one in your company right now that works within artificial intelligence. Is this an opportunity for you to partner with an artificial intelligence company to kind of fill those gaps? And so you can really start to evaluate and see where there might be weak spots or strong spots that you can play with and start to understand how all these people are coming together to be impacted. Once you've created a stakeholder map, now we can start playing with what is value and how does that start to really push the thinking. And again, it's going to start getting quite complex. So we're going to take it slow, but I'll also leave questions at the end. So if you have questions, we can always come back. So diving into value. The textbook definition of value is a relationship between the price of a good or service and the benefit that it offers. Breaking it down to a simpler terms, there's really tangible and intangible value. Tangible value is money, products and services, it's data, it's those things that you can quantify and put a number behind. The intangible is trust, loyalty, support, reputation. They're very important, but you can't ever really quantify them. And so once you start to understand the difference, you can start mapping them on top of the stakeholder map. And this creates a value exchange map, which starts to visualize how the exchanges are played out. So let's walk through an example. During my time as on the Young Designer Circle, we've been working with multiple companies who come in and want to run a project with us. So right now, what we're going to walk through is an example of a nonprofit partnering with a for-profit company and how value can be exchanged. And this is on a very simple level. So this is not mapping every single exchange, but just something to talk us through it. The way that I like to look at value exchanges is I like to do them in steps, because if you try to do tangible and intangible at the same time, it gets really messy and you might miss something. So starting with money, I think that's the easiest one. We all can look at a system and say, we know where money is going and where it's coming from. So in this scenario, we might have a donor who is providing money to the World Design Organizations, which is the nonprofit that I work for. They're going to donate money. They're also maybe providing money to this project owner to make this project come to life. So now that we know where the money is going, we can start to look at where are the services or products being exchanged. For example, the World Design Organization is essentially providing a service to this project owner by adding design or consulting. the same way that as the young designer circle, which is me, is providing service to this greater nonprofit of the World Design Organization, we are providing a service of bringing young designer input. We are bringing new thoughts. We are leading these projects often. And you can also look at how we provide services to our national and local communities. So I work closely with the Industrial Designer Society of America to bring them support and projects and experiences that are looked at from a global view. When we start looking at, so now we have monetary, we have where the services and products are laying out. This one gets a little more tricky. So you can start to play out, where is data or information being played out? Data and information is important, especially now, because data is money. In all tech companies, data is where it's at. The more data that you have, the better of a company you're going to be. So this one I like, it gets a little more complex, but you can start to see how it plays out. So essentially, if we look at the nonprofit, the World Design Organization, they're providing data to the donors to say, this is the success metrics. These are the people. We've worked with X amount of companies, and they're providing these statistics and quantitative data that allows the donors to then give us more money. The same way that maybe the World Design Organization is providing data to some of these media outlets, because now we're marketing them and they're providing us a service, but we're giving them all of this information from our company. And you can start to see how slowly everyone starts to be a part of this value exchange map. The last layer that you're going to add to this is the intangibles. And this is where you start to explore, where does trust come in? Where does support and those things that you can't really quantify, the qualitative side of value? So for example, my coworkers trust me and I trust them that the work that I'm doing on the Young Designer Circle will not interfere with work or my meetings. I will not share trade secrets. And so there's an intangible line there that's really important, because without that trust, I wouldn't be able to be a part of this group. And the same for my company or my employer. And you can start to see how the World Design Organization, as the larger nonprofit, gives support to or trust within the Young Designer Circle. And as you start to lay down these layers of value, you can start to evaluate and question some of that value. So if we were going to look at it, a arrow to arrow head is really about like a one-for-one exchange, which is interesting because when you look at something like this, where the donor is providing money to a project owner in exchange for the black is data, the blue is a service, why wouldn't the donor just provide us the money directly if we are exchanging data for service? Why do they also need to give money to this person? Or you can start to question things like, okay, so if the Young Designer Circle is maybe supplying or providing a support or a service to these local or national communities, and those communities are then giving support to these global communities, why wouldn't the Young Designer Circle just give the service to the international communities? And so now that we're mapping all of these values out, you can start to pinpoint things on it and question them. And the idea of questioning them is how you start to innovate and really explore what their impact is. So let's build one together that will hopefully really help paint the picture. So let's start with a university experience. And I'm just going to be very upfront and say that I went to Savannah College of Art and Design, which was a private school. So some of these might not be your experience, but this is a little bit of my experience, and we'll see how it lays out. So as a student, you are the core primary stakeholder. the people that you're going to be interacting with are your professors, maybe your tutors or your peers. You have a career advisor, maybe local store employees. Like, do you go to the bookshop? Do you go to the coffee shop? You have your admin staff, your finance staff, office, and I'm sure there's a ton more that I'm missing. When you go out to the tertiary level, you start to see alumni now coming into the picture, or the employers. You have media, and on the college side, you might have your loan provider or sponsors or donors, a college advisory board, and these like college executives. So this is your stakeholder map, and then you can start to, again, group them of however you would like to explore why these groups are together. When you start laying down the value, the monetary value, you can start to see that in different circumstances, maybe a student is directly paying the finance office for their university. Maybe it's a loan provider who's paying that money. The employers, maybe the student is employed, which means that now there's a dotted line to a student, or the alumni is employed, so that's a solid line to the alumni. And you can start to see how money works within a college system on every level. When you start to explore services and products, it starts getting a little more intense, and you can start to see this exchange. So a tutor is going to provide the service of tutoring, but in direct exchange for maybe money, depending on your tutoring exchange. The same that maybe every once in a while you have an exchange between buying a coffee and them providing you a coffee. And so you can start to see how these arrows are moving. And one thing to note is that there should always be a return arrow. And if there's not, that's the first place that you can innovate, because no matter where on your stakeholder map a person or a group is, they should always receive some sort of value back. If they're giving money, they should receive either an intangible, they should receive a service. Like, that's the first thing to look for as a place to innovate. When we start, we can lie in data and then playing into the intangibles. And one of my favorite examples of intangibles, the way to think about it is, often I feel like as a student, we forget that there is an intangible value between professors and students. It's not just that a professor is giving you an education or teaching you, but they're also trusting you and you're inspiring them. And that level of that intangible value of inspiration is sometimes hard to quantify, but not only are they inspiring you, but you're inspiring them. And I think that's important to note of how all of these things start to come together. And then at the end, you have a pretty detailed value exchange map. And so while this might not be migration or immigration, you can start to see how when you're dealing with really complex issues, the maps can get really complex, but at the same time, you can really pinpoint to specific things in specific areas to help innovate or streamline or make a difference depending on what type of stakeholder you're looking at. So there's one extra layer that you can add to this, and this is kind of where at DFord we really like to play and show how mobility can work. So you can essentially create an ecosystem map. So the reason I say this is an adapted ecosystem map is because if you Google ecosystem map, it's not going to look like this, because essentially you can build an ecosystem map without doing the stakeholder and value map, but I like to make them all one. So essentially an ecosystem map is adding enablers to a value exchange map, you're really exploring not only human to human interaction, but now you're looking at machine to human or human to machine. And you're adding in all of these extra layers of how things really work within an entire ecosystem. And so what is an enabler? Well, it's something that encourages, supports, and allows an addition or exchange in value. So they could be objects, an iPhone, a Alexa, a Google Home, an Apple HomePod. It could be a computer or a car. It's also services, so cloud storage, Uber, Lyft, Google Drive, etc. And when you start to look at them, you can lay them on top and see how it changes the way value is exchanged. So for example, now specifically in COVID, some of your school might be online. So now you add this computer in between, and the value is going in between a computer to be exchanged between the professor and the student. The same way when email was invented, now it's not a letter, it's through the internet, it's through email. You have phones or cloud service, and you can start to see how all of this information that was once being exchanged person to person is now being congregated into one system or one cloud source and then being dispersed. And what does that mean to the ecosystem of the experience that you're looking at? So when you lay out an ecosystem map, the best thing to do is to just continually question it. And these are not things that are easy to do alone. They're things that you should be collaborating with and pulling in people and asking them what their thoughts are, get different opinions on these things. And you can ask questions like, why does so-and-so give more value than they receive? Or why wouldn't the student just directly pay the professor? And I'm sure there's an answer to that, but just start questioning how these systems are really looking. And my favorite thing is to start playing out these like what ifs. So what if TikTok was where students went to learn from their professors? How would that disrupt this entire system? And you can start just playing out these scenarios to really explore how innovation disrupts something. And one of my favorite examples of that is they brought wolves back to, I believe it was Yosemite. And it changed not only the entire ecosystem, it also changed the direction of the river. Because they put wolves in a park, it changed the flow of water. And so the idea of that, if you play out these scenarios, it not only impacts the ecosystem, but you can actually make change in something much larger and complex than what you're thinking of. And so by doing these steps, this is the type of thinking that we do at Ford every day to define where we're going to show up and how we're going to show up and what we're going to change. And we start questioning everything about mobility, the people, the vehicles, the cars, the enablers, the streets, the government. Everything comes into play when you start looking at who's involved and what value they're exchanging. So thanks, guys. Do you have any questions? That was kind of a lot. Thanks.
Oh my goodness. Can I just say, you just brought me back to our college time. I was just transformed back into that classroom with our professor, and our professor just asking us why constantly. So thank you for taking me back into my childhood age. That was really, really fun.
I can stop sharing my screen as well so we can all see each other.
Awesome.
All right.
So we have some questions pre-prepared from the student from my class and from Professor Galvez' class. We have some questions, but I am encouraging people to jot down their questions and send it over in the chat space or the question space, either or. Let me just go through the questions that we have right now while more questions come through. One question is how important it is to visualize these maps and these exchanges. Why can't we just talk about them and just have them in conversation? Why it's important to put them somewhere?
I think the importance of visualizing is essentially empathy for different people's learning styles. Not everyone can sit in a conversation and grasp things through auditory learning. Like some people are visual learners, some people are, I think it's called kinetic learners, where they're both. And I think being able to sit down and visually look at something while you're talking about it, it also allows you to see how changes are being made on the fly. So like, say you move one stakeholder somewhere, now you can see where all those lines now have to be reimagined. And sometimes if you're just talking through it, you might miss something. Whereas a visual, you're going to actually see things moving and you can talk about them a little bit better. I think it also, just to add to that, it allows people who might not have been in every single conversation come into a space and help. And so, in a lot of these times when at Ford we're building out these really intense ecosystem maps, we print them really large and we will just have random people on it. So like if we're working on a truck and what trucks can do, we might bring in someone from Mustang or from Lincoln who's not even familiar with the truck world to see and get their opinion on how things are changing and maybe even evaluating what that means for their vehicle line. And so you can start to really just bring in all of these different points of views to help you question the work that you're doing.
And on that note, we have a question from one of my students. Says, how have you reimagine or recompose yourself when you realize that an idea that you have pre changes now that you discover something new? How do you go on about and reformulate and readapt?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely a hard thing to do, but I think one of the ways of like resetting yourself is really taking a step back and going back to that original question of what am I trying to learn and why am I here? Mm-hmm. Because the more that you can question that, the better you're gonna be able to step back and continually like pulse check yourself to make sure that you're not getting too attached to something that might break.
Talking about breaking. There's a couple of related questions in the chat. Dorothy asks, can you describe projects past or present that have possibly impacted our lives? And then also asks, do you ever begin by reflecting on the assumptions you bring to a project? And it seems like these questions go together because thinking about impact, but also how to begin, how we think a project might go or what we think about it is going to shape our initial approach. So maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah, so past projects that are impacting your life right now. Well, the first one, it's not currently, but it's going to come out this year, is the Lego packaging. So the Lego project I talked about was taking the single-use plastic pre-pack bag and redesigning it to be more sustainable. And the project was to impact how much single-use plastic use we put into our ecosystem, which is why we had to do a stakeholder map, because you can imagine how many stakeholders are coming into play when you are talking about a children's toy. So you have the child, the parent, you also have all of the people who are impacted by sustainability and the plastic that's in the ocean and et cetera. And so you start to really look at this really complex system. So that is definitely something that will be coming out and impacting. Another thing that we explore a lot in Ford and within just mobility is like package delivery or autonomous vehicles, and how autonomous vehicles are really about to disrupt how we move around and how we look at mobility. In terms of how to get rid of your bias, yes, it's definitely really important. It's one of the first steps that we do at Ford. On our teams, we like to call it like a pre-project kickoff, where we have like why we're there. There's always some kind of question that we're answering or we're looking to explore. And then what we do is we all sit down and collectively write down every single bias that we have individually. And when we were in person, we would put those on the wall. And so that way, anytime it came up in a meeting or something, like when we were synthesizing and someone was pushing for something, we could literally point to that bias and say, let's reevaluate what you're trying to say here, because we knew that this was a bias going into it. So like, how can we rethink what you're saying? And so I think looking at your biases, it's really important to be upfront with your team or with the people you're working with of what those biases are, because then it's important to hold each other accountable when they come into play, because we are humans and we all have biases in every single thing that we do. And so it's important to have different perspectives that can help you hold yourself accountable.
Thank you on that. Actually, we have an interesting question that I'm gonna just mold a little bit. They're talking about your graphics, and they're saying they're bomb, and I agree, they're bomb. I actually want to change a little bit. The question is, in our class, in immigration design class, the majority of the students are not visually inclined. And I can say, you know, when you and I were in college, my degree is writing, so I cannot draw anything at all. So what other methods are there for us to create these maps that don't involve, you know, being these artists like you are?
Yeah, so one great concern. It comes up all the time in Ford. We are one of the few design teams or like visually capable designers. I don't know if that's the right word to say it. And so when we build out these ecosystem maps, we're constantly working with people who don't have the same skill sets as us. So what we do is we will either open up like a Miro board or just use Post-it notes and color coordinate the Post-it notes, and you just write their names. Like, you don't have to have visuals. I think in the case of what I was showing, sometimes it's easier when you're storytelling something because you're walking through it, you want people to grasp it. But when you're thinking through it, I would never spend the amount of time that I did to, like, if I was just really trying to analyze it, it would just be words on a Post-it note and looking at, and then within terms of like the arrows and the lines, honestly, like, use string or use different colored markers. When I first was planning this thing, planning my talk, I literally sat on my floor with pencils and markers and paper and wrote out the whole thing. And then I came into design. So be messy. I think it's really okay to not feel like you need to have really beautiful graphics to think this way, because it's really about the thought that you put into it. And so use whatever means you can, even if they're just little doodles.
Little doodles.
I mean, like, honestly, like, I feel like most of my like little people are like a circle with like a half moon. So it, like, looks like a little person, but like, that's really the extent of when I'm like drawn. I wish I had.
And I wanted to bring this up because I think there's a not negative, but there is a bias, there's a connotation about design that you have to have certain visual skills to be a designer or to participate. And I think, you know, it's, as you just said, and what we try to bring into their class is that you don't have to completely understand or be part of every single part of an experience to be part of it, right? Like, you can bring whatever your superpower is and build from that with the support of other people's superpower, right? Like, I couldn't draw, but I'm really good at research, or, you know, I'm really good at copy. You know, somebody's really good at, not really good at copy, but they're really good at making beautiful art. And I think, you know, it's really important to see that design is not something for the elites. it's very general. It's everybody is part of it. We're all part of the ecosystem, so we're all take part of design in one way or the other.
Yeah, and the prettiness of it is really the last step. Like, it really is the very last step. Once you have everything thought through, then maybe make it pretty if you so want to, but it's not required by any means. As long as you understand and you feel that you evaluated it to make an innovation, then who cares if it's pretty? You got an innovation.
Exactly.
A question. I am coming from such a different sphere. I'm an anthropologist, and this is the first time I've been in this kind of space having these sorts of conversations. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is the concept of design thinking. I find that very appealing. And it's now that it's entered my vocabulary, I find myself using it like 10 times a day. So I was wondering if you could give us, from your seat, kind of firmly in the design world as a design professional, how would you define design thinking, and how do you feel about other people who aren't designers using or not using that concept?
Yeah, so I think design thinking to me is, in a way, being okay with failing fast and constantly asking why. And typically, like if you look up design thinking, it's like there's a process, there's research, and then it goes to synthesis and ideation. And in reality, that whole process is asking why, and then failing fast, maybe asking why again, failing fast again. And I think, like, at its core, I think it's okay that if everyone can do it, that would be amazing, because I think what it does is it helps people break out of a linear thinking and get comfortable with a very like circular, messy way of thinking. And I don't think that is precious. I don't think that is something that only designers should be able to say that they can do. As long as you are okay with like this ambiguous space of just getting messy and continually learning, I would say you're doing design thinking. And I think anyone who tells you that it is precious and that you can't do it, well, they're wrong.
We don't want them. We don't want those. We have on that note, seeing that we're in this space of very different perspectives, very different, degrees and levels of information, but focusing on our students, that are not particularly in the design field, what will be the most critical advice that you wish you would have gotten as a student? Is a very tricky one. Rather than you give, what do you think that is like, man, if I would have known this, if someone would have told me this, I
think the most critical thing that I wish I would have known was, when you're a student, it's your time to push every single button and every single boundary. And when you are going through challenges or design thinking or working on a school project, push the boundaries of that project. Like, explore, ask, even if it means, I think one of the things that I had one professor who really helped me understand like how I could make an impact was push what the deliverable is and push what your thinking is. Because when you get into the real world, like, as much as I would say that Ford is very creative and we push at DFord specifically, like, we definitely push a lot on Ford to think about human centers. There's still rules, there's still laws, there's still things that we cannot do. And in school, when you're working on a project, that's really your time to be as creative as possible, because there really are no rules. Like you don't really have all the things that are going to hit you when you have a job or someone actually producing your project. And so that's the one thing I wish I would have learned, is like, they don't have to be feasible, I guess, or viable. Like they can be out of the box thinking.
And that start to like get you to think, okay, once you get into the professional world and you know your constraints, you know that you have to hit these marks, because you've developed that muscle of pushing buttons. You can say, well, I can follow this, but curve it a little bit, right? I can modify this a little bit so it matches my crazy idea, and also the deliverables, the budget, the time, the constraints, the meetings, X, Y, and Z, right? The part. That's. I wish somebody would have told me that one too. That's a really good one. Thank you, Meghan. Do we have any other questions in the chat? Actually, we had a question prior that I would love to get your ideas on. When you made a regrettable decision, what were the steps that you took to resolve it?
Oof. Let me think. So I think the only times that I would say that I have made regrettable experiences is when it impacts a person that I'm close with. And so whether that's a manager, whether that's my teammate. So I think one of the first things that I do is talk to the person that it's impacting. Same with looking at a stakeholder map and how it impacts people. So when you make a decision that might not be the right one, you have to realize that you might not always feel the impact of that wrong decision, but someone does. Mm-hmm. And so, for example, like at Ford, one time I basically said the wrong thing to the wrong person. And essentially I didn't get in trouble for it, but it got back to my manager and they got in trouble for it. And so I first went to my manager and apologized and said, I'm sorry that this came down on you. I was in the wrong. And then I went to that person and I apologized to them. And so I think it really just looks the thing. That's why I say, like, with the stakeholder map or understanding how things are impacted, you can start to see anytime that a disruption happens or a mistake happens, like you might not feel it, but someone feels it. And you have to kind of look at who's feeling that and go address it.
Our students are really trying to understand how they can, take this idea of immigration, this huge service, and start breaking it apart and see how they can actually, understand it, understand who's impacted, the value, where those people inhabit, in what space. So it's been such a pleasure to first get to see you again after so much time, but also get to learn what a professional in the space of service is doing, and what are the steps that you take to understand the people that are involved in the service right now, D4. But in our students' perspective, how can we understand what are the stakeholders that create this immigration system, create the laws, who is it affecting, who is not, who can bypass it, and why. This is such a great mechanism, and that's why I really wanted you to come in and show our students that they can also be service designers and think about some of these tools that we have at our hands, like the stakeholder maps, and understand, break this system down so that it's more tangible, right? Because it's so big, and your tools allow us to just make some sense of it. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me and inviting me. This was really fun.
Love it.
Thank you. It was really fantastic. I learned so much. I'm sure all of us did. Thank you to everyone who attended. A question came up as to whether this will be available. We upload the videos to the Lehman YouTube channel, so you can watch it back. And we look forward to seeing you all next week, same time, same place. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Meghan. Thank you, guys.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
See you, class. Let's go back.